So let's talk about DevTools. So this is conflicts. You already know that, right? This is what you'll eventually get, a list of TV shows. In the future you'll add additional features, like for example, you'll be able to click on one element, you'll navigate somewhere else, and then you could play a trailer of a specific content, whatever, right? Of course, you will also be able to add a menu with some options, different things, right? But I'm not here to talk about conflicts. I'm here to talk about DevTools. So imagine that something is not quite well. I'm going to tell you how to debug, how to inspect, how to analyze your web application, right? So the first question is, how do we open DevTools? There are different ways to do it. There are even some shortcuts. Probably my favorite way to open DevTools is as simple as doing right-click anywhere on the screen, right-click, and clicking usually on the last element, the last button, which is inspect. If you literally just click on inspect, it will open DevTools, right? You may notice that DevTools may open at the bottom, on the left, on a floating window. It depends, right? But on the top right corner, you got three dots, and here you can decide the behavior. I personally like to open it on the right, but hey, this is just my personal preference, right? So there are no strict rules in that respect. So DevTools is an amazing world. You can do so many things. Actually, I have a strong feeling that in the future, we may have the role of DevTools developer, right? Someone who literally spends most of the time just looking at this set of tabs, right? I'm going to keep it simple because this could go insanely complex. But I'm going to start with the three most simple options that we got on the DevTools. Actually, let me change, because you cannot see the borders of the screen. So just give me a second and I'll fix that. Here you go. Right, so you can see now the screen perfectly. Cool, so let's crack on. So the first thing, I'm going to show you an example. Imagine that we are building our conflicts thingy, right? And we don't know why. You can ignore what I'm typing at the moment. But we got that, right? It's like, hey, wait a minute, what's going on? What's going on? Breaking Bad doesn't look right? I got some weird things around. I can bring my creative side. It looks horrible, right? But that may happen. We may find these kind of scenarios where we don't really understand what's going on with one of our TV shows. That's why DevTools are so useful. Why? Because I know where the problem is. I know the problem is here, somewhere here, right? So look, on the right-hand side, the first tab, which is probably the most important one, at least at the moment, is elements. So on the elements panel, we can literally analyze the structure of our user interface. And as you can see, as soon as I hover over any element, this blue thingy, this blue overlay tells me where am I pointing to. You see, for example, if I hover the first link, I'm highlighting Black Mirror. If I hover the second one, I highlight Breaking Bad. Even more interestingly, because we know that we got an issue here, if you notice, on the right-hand side, this square, this box is very, very important because here it's telling you the box model. The box model is a fundamental principle in web development. The box model is talking about how your box looks like. And here we got 1, 2, 3, 4 colors. These 4 colors are very important to master. The first one, the blue one, which is the inner box, you see the picture itself, this is the content. The content, right? Could be an image, could be text, could be whatever, the content. Then the second one, the green one, right? Even though here it's hard to notice this is green because I got a background color, but if I change the background color, I'll go to the bottom in a minute. Now you can probably see that we've got a green box, right? Green border. So this green thingy, this is the padding. We'll talk in a minute what the padding is. Then, if we keep looking around, we've got the salmon, or whatever this color is. So this is the border. And finally, we got the brown one, or the dark salmon, which is the margin. So can anyone tell me the differences between the padding, the border, and the margin?
So let's say we have a box. We created a box with this, and we gave, and it's a div, which means it displays it displays button.
Mm-hmm.
So then we will have the if we gave it a padding,
Mm-hmm.
the padding will be inside of the margins, and for the margins we'll add some extra
Yep.
pixels to the margin.
Yep.
So the padding is inside, the margin is outside.
Yep.
And the border?
Yep. Border.
The border is between them.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I like that. Yes. So Alex is right. You can think when we're talking about boxes, think about that. The border. So the element is defined by the border. If you are driving a car, you are the content. You are the person inside of the car. So the border will be the chassis, will be the doors, will be the windows. This is the border. It's where your car ends, right? So then, this space here, which let me highlight again, the green gutter, the green space, is the space between your body and the door of the car, right? But it's still part of the car. That's inside of the car. So that's inside of the box, right? So then we got the border, and this dark salmon color here is the space between the outside of the car and the rest of the road. So this is outside of the car, right? So generally speaking, everything here affects, obviously, to how this box looks like, right? But this is important. If you feel that your box doesn't look correct, it's very important to pay attention to this diagram here, because this will tell you if your problem is on the padding, if your problem is on the border, if your problem is on the margin, or on a combination of them, right? Is there any question? No? Does that make sense? Right? Cool. So in that particular aspect, we can clearly see that we massively failed. We've done everything wrong, right? So then I would like to pay attention to the bottom, because here in this panel, in here, we can see the properties, the CSS rules that affect to our box, to our blue box. Because of that, it's very easy to play around with them. Look, if I don't want any padding, I can just get rid of that. Look. Real time. Obviously, these changes are not going to be applied to our Visual Studio Code. If I refresh, look, I'm going to fix it. Now it looks perfect, right? But if I refresh the changes, it will be wrong again. So this is just for testing purposes. If you want to play around with this, you can, look, you can play with it, which is good, right? Because it's very useful for debugging purposes, right? So yeah, you can do whatever you want. You can change colors, you can, So this is really good when you want to do something like the overlay that most of you are doing at the moment. This is very useful for prototyping. I don't really know how to do it, so instead of going to Visual Studio, change something, go to the browser, it doesn't work, Visual Studio, change something, doesn't work. This round trip is very boring, right? So for testing purposes, this is very agile. I would really like to iterate and to prototype with the DevTools. I know that some of you are complaining about something. Look, let's have a look to the overlay. Let's ignore the box model for a minute. You see the overlay. But what happens if we want to change the overlay? If we want to for instance, to change the color of the title? Based on what I explained, it's very hard, right? Because what is the overlay? Well, I can find it. I definitely can find it. It's here, but I cannot see it, right? Because if it's there, it's just visible if I'm hovering the image. But if I go to the right, it gets hidden. It's not very easy. It's not easy to keep the overlay visible all the time. For these kind of things, with modern Chrome, we can do some very interesting tricks. If you pay attention here, if I select one element, if you see here, we got hover. You see this thingy, this small thingy here? So if I click here, I can simulate user events. So I can simulate that the user is hovering the image, which is very convenient. Look, if I simulate that the box is hover, boom. You see? I'm not hovering Breaking Bad, but I'm simulating it. So now I have full control over the box. So I can come here and then say a color red. Boom. You see? It's very convenient because otherwise sometimes, especially when we depend on user events, hover, click, blah, 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 it's very hard to debug them with Chrome. Any question? Right?
If I wanted to see how you did the whole.
How I see how?
I wanted to see how you did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do I see the code behind that?
The code.
Behind it.
Yeah. So it should look. So it's there actually. Look, this is my code, right? Because now it's hover. I can see the class. You see, when I do hover on the cover, then the cover overlay goes to bottom 0. Now they can play with it, right? I can do, no, not bottom 0, bottom whatever. Look. Yeah? Or I can put it on top. You know, you can play around with this, right? Any question? No? Right. So that's the first thing. Elements. We can do so many things here. We can even delete elements, right? So we can figure out how our UI will look like if I delete some elements, right? Also, one more thing about the elements panel. Most of you already noticed that we can simulate mobile as well, right? So if you see this button here on top, if I click on it, look, I can simulate how our application will look like on some of the devices. We can even add more, right? Also let you know that this is a very low quality simulation. We are not simulating the hardware, we are not simulating the device, just the resolution, just the screen, right? But hey, it's not about the starting point because at least it's telling us how will this look like on each device, even the menu, right? So we can figure out if it will look like as expected. Also for iPad, you know. For instance, in that particular case, I can see that this is not applying to you yet, but you'll do a task, I think it's task number 11 or something like that, where if you're on an iPad, we'll show 2 covers, 2 images, 2 TV shows per row. And also we can change the orientation. Look, you see, 2 and 3. Right, so this is really good because I don't have to go to my iPad and keep training, and also on my iPad I don't have access to the DevTools. So this is really good, at least as a starting point, right? That covers 90% of your UI requirements, probably. Right, so that's the elements panel. Let's have a look to the next one, the sources. I'm just going to explain elements, sources, and very briefly network. We'll leave the following ones for another session. So sources, this is very, 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 very important. This is very important because if you're struggling with any particular aspect on JavaScript, this is the easiest way to debug and to play around with JavaScript. So look at what you can do with sources. Essentially with sources, you can debug your JavaScript. You can add breakpoints. You can inspect what you've done on your application. But I'm not going to talk about that now because I want to dedicate a separate session to analyze how to play around with the JavaScript that runs your application. But what I would like to do now, because that's the most fundamental thing, is look at that. We can play with basic JavaScript. If you notice on the left-hand side, we got this tiny arrow here. So we got some options, page, file system, blah, 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 blah. I'm particularly interested about snippets because a snippet means nothing, literally. A snippet is just sandbox, right? So I can write JavaScript here. Look, if I add some curly brackets to surround my code, I can do whatever I want, right? So console.log hello, right? So if I type something, let me increase the font size a bit, right? So if I do console.log hello and I run it, you see, it shows the output at the bottom, right? Because of that, this is a very convenient way to play with JavaScript. Imagine, for example, that you want to understand how a function works. So let's create a function welcome, and the function return welcome to the bootcamp, right? So now if I invoke welcome, it should display the message at the bottom, right? So this is a good way to train your JavaScript skills. So how will we change it, for example, to display welcome to the bootcamp, comma, Peter? How will we change that? You tell me. A what? Argument, where? Yep. What's the name of the argument? Name, for example, right? And then what? Yeah. Comma, plus, name. Something like that? Will this work? Yes. Welcome to the bootcamp, comma, Peter. You see, it's a very simple way to start playing with JavaScript principles. Do you remember, even though this is not part of the session, how to use template literals? Backticks. Yes, backticks. How do we do that with backticks? Backtick, yeah. And then what? I hear nothing.
So delete your other, put backtick right at the end after name for a start.
Yeah.
Okay, and then to get the name in there. All right, let's delete the other quotation. Can we put together? Get rid of the plus as well. And then we need a $, open curly braces. Okay, I put name within the curly braces.
Something like that.
Something like that.
Okay. Yes, you're right. You see, still the same result, right? So that's why this is so convenient, because you can play with so many different examples. And obviously, the good thing is once you have a snippet, you can save it. If you press Ctrl S or Command S, the snippet gets saved. So on the left-hand side, you can have a collection of snippets, right? So you can go back to them afterwards. You see, to play with different type of coding. Yeah, no, that's it. Don't look at the screen now. This is not a good example. But yes, it's just for experts, right? But yes, so that's the thing, right? You can play with different snippets and go back to them afterwards. So this is very convenient. I totally recommend you, if you're struggling, for example, with any training, with any coding challenge question, with things like that, go to the snippets and then play around with it, right? We'll also learn, not now, but we'll learn how to add breakpoints, how to debug your code, blah, 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 all these things. Any question? How do you get the console? It should be there automatically.
Actually, mine's like on the same line as the sources network application security.
Yeah. The thing is, even if you close it, when you run the example, look, it should show at the bottom. Doesn't do that? Okay, we can have a look afterwards. But yeah, that's the idea, right? Cool. The last thing I would like to talk, and I'm going to keep this very, 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 very short, is about network. So at the moment, you don't have to deal with it. But starting from task number 18, which is not that far away in reality, start from task number 18, you will need this tab. Why? Because the network is telling you where the data, where the images, where the content is coming from. For example, in my case, my TV shows are coming from a database. I have a database in the cloud somewhere in Ireland, so that my TV shows are coming from there. Because of that, if something is not working well, if I refresh the page, I can see, look, I can see that where the data is coming from. So I can see that this is, you know what type of data is this? A what? Object? Is this an object? Array? Who said array? It's an array of objects, correct. Here, we got an array of how many objects? 6, correct. And then for each object, look, we can inspect what's going on, you see? So I can see the data. Okay, I got for each object, I got an ID, Black Mirror, a synopsis with, description of the TV show. I got the title, blah, 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 blah. Every single web application you are using follows this pattern. Netflix, Amazon, Google, when you perform a Google search, it does literally that, right? It goes to the backend, it hits an endpoint, and then it returns some data, right? You can see the formatted data, you can see the raw data, cookies, timing, performance, blah, blah, whatever. But again, I'm not going to go any further on this. Just let you know that eventually the third tab on the DevTools network will become very, very important to understand where your data is coming from. Any question? Right? No? So then let's recap. Elements tab, the first one is to inspect the UI and to be able to debug what's going on. Problems like set index we were discussing before, paddings, margins, colors, blah, blah, blah. Sources, very, very important to create snippets and to deal with basic JavaScript problems. And network, very important to analyze where the data is coming from. That's it? No questions? Right? I'll upload the video to YouTube and I'll post the link on Slack shortly. Thank you, guys.